Hello crew and welcome back. In this video I want to talk about the proper way to communicate between blueprints, and that is through blueprint interfaces. We're going to do that with a practical example of how to highlight objects in our world that we want to point out to a player. So let's get started. So today I want to talk about interfaces. The project I have open is from my last video where we showed an example of how to change the material on this ball and use different variables to track that state. So for this example, I'm not going to need that ball. So I'm going to delete it from the world. In my blueprints folder, I am going to go ahead and make a new folder and call this interfaces. Inside of here, I'm going to go to blueprint and then down to blueprint interface. Now I'm going to name this BPI Interact. Then I'm going to go ahead and open that up and dock that to my main window. So in our previous example, if you followed along on that video, you will see where we made a variable reference to our BP ball in our character, which is not best practice, but we did go ahead and make a reference to that and interact directly with that class from the character. Typically, this is not great practice, and the more items you get in your world, the more of these you'll have to add, and your character code will become very burdened hard to manage. So this is where interfaces come in. It allows you to talk to another object without knowing everything about it or having it loaded into memory with a direct reference. So when you first create an interface, you'll come up and you'll see this kind of looks like a blueprint window, but there's not much else you can do in here. You can't right click to create nodes or anything else. It will start you with the default function. I'm going to go ahead and rename this to onInteract highlight. And then I'm going to create a second one and call this onInteract end. Now, if you want to, when you do create these, you can bring in inputs and send outputs. So for example, if create another one and call this can interact. And then for outputs, I'm just going to call this value, and then we're going to leave that as a Boolean. So as you can see, that created a return node for us, so we can do this. With interfaces, you're simply defining an agreement between blueprints, and with that definition, explaining how each of them are going to interact with one another. The actual individual logic of that interaction is up to the blueprint that implements this code. I'll show you an example of that here in a moment. So I'm going to go ahead and compile and save. So I'm going to come over to the third person character blueprint. So I'm going to come down here and make some space. So on this, what we're going to do is as our character moves around, as you saw in the opening clip, as they come closer to an object we want to bring to their attention, we're going to highlight that object, but only if it implements our new interface. Event tick can be useful, but it can also be dangerous. So let me show you an example of that. Event tick will fire whatever code you have on here every time the frame refreshes. So depending upon your game and the hardware, that could be anywhere from 40 to 120 times per second. Obviously that's overkill for a lot of things we want to do. But for right now, for this example, let's add a line trace by channel. We're going to get our camera as a starting point. So I'm going to drag out my follow camera. From there, we're going to get the world location. We're going to add that as its starting point. Move my camera over here because from the camera, we also want to get its forward vector so we know which way it is facing. Move this over a little bit, make some room. So from there, what we want to do is we want to add a multiply node. So I'm going to drag that out. And I'm going to press star on my number pad and get multiply. So I'm going to right click this. On a lot of nodes, you can change the input value for the second pin. In this case, I want to do a float of single position. And this is going to be how far away from the camera we want to look. Obviously, we don't want to see for infinity. So in this case, we'll put about 15,000 units. And then what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to add that. I'm going to move this to the second node. You're going to want to add this to the location of the camera. And what that's going to do is that's going to take the camera's location, add 1,500 units in the direction it's facing, and that's going to be our endpoint. So right now we're going to look at everything that is on the visibility channel. If you want to create an array of things to ignore, you can do that. I'm going to turn on the debug draw type to persistent so you can see what we're talking about right now. So I'm going to go ahead and compile and save. Well, I'm going to come back to the game and start it. So as you can see how many of these red lines come out, and we're going to come say over here. As you can see, the red lines start the trace, and when they do interact with something, you'll get that square dot and then the green line afterwards. But as you can see how many lines are appearing on my screen right now, that's just too much for most actions. So instead, what we're going to do is call a timer so we can control how often that function fires. So I'm going to come back to my BP character. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the event tick for a moment. I'm going to come up to the top where to event begin play. This is the code we added in the last video to create a reference to the BP ball. So I'm just going to add another pin to our sequence node here, and I'm going to drag off of that, and I'm going to say set timer by function name. So on this, let me create a little room. So what this node does is this will create a timer that will fire off whatever function we define here at whatever interval we define here. So right now I'm going to set this at 2.5 seconds. And here we will type in the name of our function. So let's come over on the left. Let's hit this plus and let's call this look for interactable. I'm going to highlight that, hit F2, and then I'm going to copy it. I'm going to come back to the event graph from this tab at the top. And I'm going to paste that in as the function name. That is case sensitive and it does need to be spelled the exact same way. And then once we've created this timer, what we're going to do is we're going to promote this to a variable. And we're going to call this look interaction timer so we can have a reference to it so we can start and stop this timer as needed as we build out the rest of our logic. So now what we can do is go back down to the bottom where we had our event tick code. I'm going to copy this code. I'm going to cut it out of here. I'm going to go to our look for interactable function. I'm going to paste this in. So now, without changing anything else, I'm going to compile and save. We'll come back and start our game. So as you can see, 2.5 seconds after the game starts, our line trace ran from the camera to 1500 units ahead, but it stopped. The reason it stopped is in our third-person character event graph. Back up where we define the timer. I forgot to check looping. So we're going to hit looping, compile and save, and go back in and test the game again. And now as you can see, every 2.5 seconds, this trace is going to go off. Now you can set this at 1 second, half a second, 3 seconds. It just depends upon your gameplay and what you're going for. 2.5 seconds might be too slow for what you're trying to do. So back in our code, I'm going to go ahead and go to the look for interaction graph. Now when you notice when the line trace ran, it gave me just that one spot where it hit, and it was just that small square block. So actually what I want to do is I want to look in a little bit bigger area so my character doesn't have to be as precise with the camera movement. So I am going to do a spear trace by channel. And then I'm going to go ahead and hook up these nodes just like they were before. I'm going to get the starting location from the camera and the end location of 1500 units in the direction it's facing. So the other thing you're going to want to set for the spear trace by channel is how big you want your sphere to be. So let's make this about 250 units. Let's also turn on the debug draw so you can see this in action. So let's compile and save and go back to our game. And now you will see every 2.5 seconds or whatever interval you set up, there will be a line trace that goes out with a large sphere at each end. So the sphere in front of us will report back if it has hit anything or not. Well, now that we have this information, let's find something to do with it. So now let's go ahead and go back to our blueprint directory. I'm going to create a new folder I'm going to call this Interactables. Inside of here, I'm going to create a new blueprint actor. I'm going to name this BP Orb. And this could be a magical orb, a potion, a book, whatever you want to draw your character's attention to. So I'm going to open BP Orb. In here, I'm just going to add a sphere. And then I'm going to go into my starter content, materials. And let's find a material to use. Let's try the metal chrome material. I'm going to highlight that, and then I'm going to hit this little arrow next to the material so it applies that for me. So I'm going to compile and save. So now I'm going to drag BP Orb out into the world. So now that we have our orb, let's create a material to highlight it with. So I'm going to go to content. I'm going to create my own material folder. Inside of here, I'm going to right click and create a material. I'm going to call this M underscore highlight master. I'll explain here in a moment why we're calling it that. So for a emissive highlight material, you don't want to override any other material you have in your object. So on the left-hand side, you're going to want to come over and we're going to change this from opaque to masked. And you'll see that our output node changes. From here, we're going to change this to unlit since this will be an emissive material creating its own light. We don't want the environment lights to affect it in any way. We also want this to be a two-sided material. So I'm going to go ahead and save that for a moment. So over here, very simple things we want to add. From here, we want to look for a constant 3 vector. So you can grab it this way, or a shortcut for that is to hold down 3 and left click. From here, I want to right click and I want to convert this to a parameter so I can control it from my designer interface. And we're going to call this color shade. We want to take that and hook that up to our emissive color. From here, you want to add a node called two-sided sign. Be your constant right here. And from that, we want to do a -1, or a 1-, excuse me. We're going to hook that up to our mask. This is going to mask out the center of our object and only put our outline where it belongs. Down here, we want to add a vertex normal. We want to drag this out to a multiply node. And then we're going to add in a single scalar parameter. You can hold down 1 on your keyboard and left click to get that. We're going to promote this to a parameter also. We're going to call this outline thickness. And I'm going to default value that to 1. So from here, we're going to multiply those two together and we're going to add that to the world position. I'm going to go ahead and save this. And because it's a little hard to see anything right now, I'm going to go ahead and give this a default color of, say, yellow for right now. All right, so we're going to go ahead and save this. So now the reason we called this the master material, you're going to want to come back to your content drawer. We're going to right click this and create a material instance. I'm going to name this MI underscore, let's call it green highlight. So I'm going to open this up, close general, and I'm going to open the parameter value section. From here, I can turn these on and then change these for this particular instance without changing anything within my master material. That way I can use the master material as a template and create multiple instances of that with their own unique flair. So in this case, let's change this to green, something like that. So okay, and let's maybe make the thickness 2. So let's save our material. Let's go back to our map. Just to see what this looks like, I'm going to get a little closer to the orb. If you click on the orb, either in your viewport or over on the right-hand side, inside of this, you will see the hierarchy that the actor is made up of. This is the same hierarchy that you see up here. Notice my name is missing. So I'm going to name that sphere. Sorry about that. So in this hierarchy, I'm going to click on sphere and search for material. And what you will find down here is material overlay. So if I highlight the material instance in our content browser and I add that to our object, you will see right here that our object is now outlined. So if I take our material instance that I still happen to have open, third person map, I'm going to move these windows so I can see both of them. And what's great about these material instances, you can come in real time in your editor, look at the changes being made. So that's just a lot of fun and allows you to kind of fine tune and just see the changes take place. Here I'm going to, let's make that 5. So it's nice and obvious. Seems a little obnoxious, honestly. Let's go back to 2. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. Now I'm done with this. I'm going to close it. But we don't want this highlight on our object all the time. So I'm going to come down here to material overlay, and I'm going to hit this arrow right here, which will reset any of these parameters back to their default value. So how do we change this through our interface? Well, first we come to BP orb. We click on class settings. Over here on the right, you're going to see implemented interfaces. As you can see right now, we don't have any. So if I click on add, I'm going to go to BPI interact. As soon as I add this, over here on the left, you'll have a section called interfaces, and everything we defined in our interface is now available over here. And due to the color coding, you can see the difference between the functions and the events. So I'm going to go ahead and close my master material and my interface just to clean this up a little bit. So on my BP orb, I'm going to go to the event graph. I'm going to double click my on interact highlight and my on interact end. So for these, let's just start pretty simple and let's do a print string. And we're going to open this up. We're going to say highlight added. Just so we can see it better, we're going to make this yellow. And let's give it a duration of 4 seconds. Close that back up. Same from end. I want to do a print string. I'm going to say highlight removed. I want to make that a red color so it stands out. I'm going to also give this a duration of 4 seconds. Let's go ahead and compile and save our code. One last thing I want to do to BP orb, I want to come into our can interact event. And as you remember, we set this up to have a return value. So it's going to come in and create a function for us. I'm going to move this over. I'm going to just create a print string and say hello from orb, just so we make sure we have interacted with it. And I'm just going to set that return value to true so we can always interact with it. This would be very useful if you have, say, an NPC that is already busy in dialogue or is busy doing another type of interaction or request, and it doesn't make sense for your character to interact with it just then, or maybe an item is in use. This is a great way to say yay or nay if your character can interact or not. So I'm going to compile and save that. Now back over in our third person character, we can come back to our function named look for interactable, and off of our sphere trace by channel, we're going to take this return value. We're going to add a branch, and this will tell us if we hit something or not. If we did hit something, we want to take the out hit information and we want to break the hit results on that so we can get the individual pieces of information that we want. Now, the great thing about interfaces is you do not necessarily need to check what you're trying to interact with implements this or not. Let me show you an example. Let's take the hit actor, and I'm just going to call can interact, and you'll see this message next to it. This is the can interact that we set up from our blueprint interface. So if we did hit something, can interact, we're just going to leave it that. We're going to hit compile and save. So the other thing we want to do for performance is if we go back to our third person character on the sphere trace by channel, you'll notice right now our trace channel is visibility. So that is every visible object in the world. One of the great things about Unreal is if you come up to edit, go down to project settings, and search for channel. Under engine collision, you will see trace channels here. You can create a new trace channel. We're going to call this the interact channel. And then by default, we want everything to ignore this channel. So I'm going to go ahead and say accept, and you'll see this added. And I don't remember, but I think you can add 20 some custom channels in here. So I'm going to close this. I'm going to come back to our third person character. I'm going to hit compile. I'm going to change this down to the interact. So the reason I'm doing this is every time this fires, previously when it was on the visibility channel, it's going to hit and report back that it found every single ramp, stair, tree, anything else that you may have in your world. In this case, I want to come in and set this to interact. So then it's only going to report on the items that are set to block traces on this channel. So let me show you what I mean on that. So I'm going to come to BP orb. I'm going to highlight my sphere. On this side, I'm going to filter for collision. Under collision presets, you're going to see block all dynamic. So I'm going to open that up. I'm going to hit this drop down. I'm going to go to custom. So if you open this up, if you do not see the custom channel we've created, go ahead and hit compile. And then you'll see interact come in here with the default of ignore. So since this is an interactable object for us, we want to turn on block for that channel. Then we're going to come back to our map and test our game. As we get closer to the orb, we're going to see that our can interact function is firing off when the camera is pointed in the right place. In the upper left corner, you're going to see hello from orb every time it fires. Okay, great, progress. Let's stop that and do something a little more interesting now. While this does not cause any errors, sometimes it's not great to just blindly fire these messages. So I'm going to go ahead and move this over. From our hit actor, I'm going to get a node named does object implement interface. I'm going to pull this up. Our interface is going to be our BPI interact. I will pull from here and create a branch. So if the actor we hit does implement our interface, we're going to check if we can interact with it. Any of these nodes, you can double click to create a reroute node. So I'm going to do that and put it about there. We can fold that one up for now and straighten these up. So then from our hit actor, you can grab from this reroute node and we can say on interact highlight. So we're going to go ahead and call that. Compile and save. We're going to go back over to our orb. On the left side, double click our on interact highlight. And if you remember, we set up our print string that says highlight added. So let's test that right quick. And this is game dev, folks. Do something, test, do something, test. You don't ever want to make too many changes without testing to make sure you're on the right path. So as you can see on this one, it says hello from orb and our highlight was added. Great. So we are interacting with those interface events. So let's go back over to the orb. I'm going to leave the print string here. So from here, we want to simply set the overlay material. And it's going to know based on this object that it's the sphere, since it's the only object that can have the overlay material. I'm going to go to my content drawer, the material folder we created. I'm going to choose my material instance green highlight, add that in. And if we want to, while we're here, we can highlight both of these nodes, copy and paste them. I'm going to go back and find the chrome material we originally set up. I'm going to highlight that and add it here. So we're going to compile and save, test our game. We're going to get close to it. And sure enough, there's our green highlight. But as we notice now, when we look away, the highlight doesn't go away. We look at it again, it doesn't go away. We can see with the red squares in the orb that we are interacting with it, but we haven't told it how to get rid of the highlight. Let's go ahead and take this orb and we're going to hit Control D and create another one over here, plenty far away. We're going to go up to File and Save All, just because it's been a little while, and sadly Unreal does like to crash every once in a while. So we have our interact highlight set up and we have our interact end set up. So our logic here is complete for the orb. We want to go back over to our third person character. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to track what is the last thing that we hit. So that way, if we know we're looking at something different, we can remove the highlight from the previous object. So for that, we're going to come on the left-hand side by variables. We're going to create one called last object hit. And this is going to be of type actor. We don't really need to know or care what kind of actor it is, but we know there is an actor and it is loaded in memory, so we're just going to do an object reference for it. Now that we have this variable, I'm going to take on interact highlight, we're going to move this down and create some room. We can create another reroute node and keep this nice and clean. Now we're going to want to figure out is if the actor we hit is not equal to the last object that we hit. So I can drag this over and drop it right on there so it connects it for me. And then we're going to bring this up, create a branch. Hook up this branch and we'll worry about this connecting this in a moment. So if this is true, that the object we are now hitting is not equal to the last object that we hit, we want to then call on interact end. And we want the target of that to be the last object that we hit. Now that we've turned the highlight off of that object, we want to hold down Alt and drag out our last object hit and set it to the new object that we're looking at. And then from there, we can turn on the highlighting. For this connector, we can come back to our previous pin, that up here, and put it up here for our value. Now remember that this is connected back to the actor that we are currently hitting. Okay, I know that was a lot, so let's review a little bit. So we're going to send out our spear trace. If we hit something, we're going to find out if it does implement our BPI interact. If it does, we're going to ask it if we can interact with it. Oh no. And see, this is why I review your code. I apologize, I did forget a step. So I'm going to highlight all of these pieces, move this down. Once again, welcome to game dev, folks. These things happen. So if we can interact with it, then we're going to see if it's not equal to the last object that we hit. If it is not, then we're going to turn off the highlighting on the last object that we hit, set this variable to the current object that we're looking at, and then we'll highlight the new object. That was a lot. I apologize for the mistake, but you will encounter these as you're prototyping in your own games. So let's come to the game and test, since we did add quite a few things here. So as we can see, we got our highlight on this. As we come over, the highlight is now on this one and disappears from the first one. We can switch it back. Well, you notice if we look away, it still is not taking away the highlight on the first object. So if we come back to third person character, we're going to take a look at this. So there's a couple different ways we can handle this. So remember, this is running in a loop. So every time we hit something, if we have looked away and our line trace does not hit anything, we could remove it then. So let's take this code. We're going to copy it. I'm going to come down here and paste it. I'm going to take the false from our did we hit an object. I'm going to plug it in there. Move this over just a little bit. If we did hit an object and it does not implement our BPI interface, we can come from there and remove the highlight from the previous object. So if we wanted to, we can even take the node here. If we cannot interact with the object, it returns false. We can even remove it there at that time. So once we remove the highlight from something, we want to then take our last object hit and just go ahead and update that value. In this case, we did not hit anything relevant, so we're going to leave this blank. So we're going to return this to null. So it should run through just fine the next time. Let's go ahead and test that. So compile and save. Come back to our game. So there's our first highlight. There's our second highlight. We're going to go ahead and look away, and we'll notice both highlights are removed. Once I bring the camera back, that orb is highlighted again, and now neither of them are. So now we are successfully highlighting and unhighlighting objects depending upon the camera's visibility. So if we want to, these line traces are kind of annoying. So let's stop the game. Let's go into our third person character, into our look for interact function. We know these are working, so let's turn off our debug draw. This to none. And the other thing I think we can do, let's come back out to the event graph. Let's go up to the top where it says add input mapping. Actually, I'm going to change that comment now that we've added more logic in here. I call this game start / add input mapping. I'm going to come down here to where we set our timer. I'm going to move this down to say 1.5. Make it a little more responsive. So every 1.5 seconds, this will fire off, which is still much more performant than every single frame. Compile and save. Test my game one more time. Highlight, we get another highlight. There we go. All right, crew, there you go. So I'm hoping you learned a little bit about interfaces. There are 100 ways you can use interfaces, and they are a great tool to communicate with other game objects without having to load them completely onto your main character all the time. So I hope you found this tutorial useful. Please let me know down in the comments what other tutorials you would like to see, and if you like short form or longer form content. I have several ideas of videos I want to make coming up, but I want to hear from you guys and see what's helpful for you. So until then, thanks for stopping by, and I look forward to making games with you.